My name is Bonnie Mayers, and at 33, I finally bought something that belonged to straight-up nobody but me. A small cottage right on the North Carolina coast. 2 bedrooms, a leaky gutter, and way more quiet than I'd had in 9 whole years. My very first night there, the phone starts ringing. It's my mother. She doesn't even say hello. She just drops. "We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad said it's totally fine." I stood right there in my own kitchen and low-key held my breath. Then she adds the little toxic line she always slides in. "If you don't like it, you can go find somewhere else." My hands were straight up shaking, but I just smiled. Why? Because she made one massive mistake that night, and she didn't even realize it yet. By the time their moving truck rolled up my driveway the next morning, I had already made 3 phone calls and invited the one specific group of people my mother prayed would never set foot in that room. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where ordinary women stop apologizing and start setting the record straight. If you've ever had a family that constantly takes way more than it ever gives, you are in the exact right place. Drop a comment, hit that subscribe button, and stay locked in with me. Because what went down when that truck pulled in is something I am never, ever going to forget. For 9 long years, I grinded in the emergency room at a hospital right outside Raleigh. Nights, mostly. I learned how to walk straight into the absolute worst moment of a total stranger's life and keep my voice completely level. Nurses don't panic. We don't do that. We triage. We look for the thing that's bleeding out the fastest, and we shut that down first. I was damn good at it. I was so good at it for so long that I didn't even notice I had slowly started to completely disappear. On the very last shift I ever worked, a guy coded twice before the sun even came up, and we pulled him back both times. When my replacement finally walked in at 7 a.m., I realized something terrifying. I couldn't even remember driving to work. I'd spent a whole decade keeping complete strangers alive and totally forgot to keep myself alive, too. So I just quit. No big dramatic speech, no scene. I just filled out the paperwork, handed back my badge, and drove off into the gray morning light. People asked if I was scared out of my mind. I wasn't. I had a solid plan and a beautiful number sitting in my savings account that I built one brutal 12-hour shift at a time. I sold my condo in the city, the one with the gym I literally never stepped foot in and a lovely view of a concrete parking garage. I took every single dime of that money, piled it onto my savings, and bought this cottage right on the water, 200 miles away from absolutely everyone who knew my name. It was small, it was old, and it was entirely mine. The deed had exactly one name on it. My name. I need you to lock that into your brain right now, because in less than 24 hours, my mother was about to conveniently forget that fact on purpose, and she was planning to do it right in front of a whole live audience. But that first afternoon, I was completely blissfully ignorant. I only knew the air smelled straight up like salt. And for the first time in actual years, nobody needed me to fix a single damn thing. You really need to understand the exact kind of daughter I'd been, because it explains perfectly why my mother was so incredibly sure of herself. In my family, I was always the designated fixer. I handled everything. When my brother Kevin bounced his rent check at 24, who covered it? Me. When my parents started throwing down at Thanksgiving, I was the one who had to walk my dad out to the garage so he could low-key cool off. When Grandma Ruth got incredibly sick, I drove 4 hours every single weekend for a whole year and slept in a miserable recliner right by her hospital bed. Nobody ever asked me to do it. That was the real trick of the whole dynamic. In my household, Bonnie will handle it was never a request. It was straight up a weather forecast. My mother, Linda, would say it the exact same way normal people say it might rain later this afternoon. And I just let her roll with it for 33 years because saying the word no felt like leaving a massive, gaping wound wide open. A nurse's hands completely detest an open wound. They want to close it, dress it, clean it, and make it stop hurting. That instinct served complete strangers beautifully in the ER. It served my toxic family even better. And it cost me way more than I ever bothered to add up. I'm not telling you this so you'll sit here and feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this so you can understand the exact twisted math my mother was running in her head that night. She wasn't calling to ask for permission to move into my new house. She had never once needed my permission for a single thing in her entire life. She had spent 3 straight decades watching me quietly absorb whatever garbage the family handed down to me. She had every single reason to believe I'd just absorb this massive play, too. A free beach house, Oh, absolutely. Bonnie will handle it. That was the forecast. What she completely failed to account for was the fact that I had finally moved somewhere where there was absolutely nobody left for me to fix. And let me tell you, an empty schedule does something wild to a woman's brain. It actually gives her the time to think. About 8 weeks before that crazy first night, I made a quick decision that turned out to matter way more than I ever expected. I went totally quiet. Not angry, just straight up silent. Doctor's orders, basically. The exact week I packed up and left the hospital, a therapist I'd seen literally twice told me something so simple it stuck to my ribs. She said, "Bonnie, you cannot recover in the exact same room where you got hurt." My family was that room, so I muted the family group chats. I stopped picking up phone calls between shifts that didn't even exist anymore. When my mother would text me something like, "Call me when you get a second," I would let a few entire days pass by before I bothered to reply, and guess what? The world didn't come crashing down. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was just a patient finally taking her own damn prescription. For 2 months straight, I let myself just exist and rest. Long walks on the beach, full nights of deep sleep, the slow, heavy work of remembering who the hell Bonnie actually was when nobody was constantly paging her to save the day. It was the absolute healthiest I had been since I started nursing school. But here is the absolute catch about going totally ghost. The room keeps right on talking even after you step outside of it. I didn't know that yet. I honestly thought my silence was this beautiful, clean wall I'd built all around myself. A solid, perfect boundary. I had absolutely no clue that on the other side of that wall, a whole-ass fanfiction story about me was being told to people I loved, in rooms I wasn't even in. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more that fake story hardened into concrete fact. My mother had 8 clean weeks and a totally captive audience, and she utilized both to the absolute max. While I was completely busy putting my shattered pieces back together, she was out here telling her sister, her church friends, and literally half of my cousins that her wonderful daughter had finally come around. That her daughter just wanted to take care of her aging parents. That her daughter had officially offered up her home. I had offered absolutely zip, but you can't exactly argue with a script you've never read, and I was about to hear the whole thing blasted out all at once. Let me break down this cottage for you real quick, because it is literally the only character in this entire story that never lied straight to my face. It sat right at the very end of a sandy lane on the Crystal Coast, so close to the ocean that I could hear the waves crashing right from my bed. The porch wood was beautiful and silver from 40 years of weathering the elements. The kitchen had these bright yellow cabinets that some previous owner had painted completely by hand. They were a little crooked, and honestly, I loved them more than anything I had ever owned in my life. There was this old wicker chair sitting on the porch that just came with the property. I'd officially had the keys for about a month, but between closing out my city condo and running 100 tiny last-minute errands, I had only managed to haul the absolute last of my moving boxes down that exact morning. This was my very first real afternoon of freedom. I was sitting right there in that wicker chair with a hot cup of coffee, watching the sunlight turn this deep, gorgeous orange over the sound, and I straight up fell asleep sitting completely upright. When I finally opened my eyes, the coffee was ice cold and the sky had turned this deep shade of purple. And for the first time in memory, I hadn't dreamed about a crashing patient, a loud alarm, or an emergency code. I just slept. Do you even know how long it had been since I had rested without feeling like I had to earn it first? I literally couldn't remember. I sat out there in the dark for a little while longer, just listening to the water move, and I thought to myself, this is exactly what I put the work in for. Not a status symbol to brag about to people, just a safe space to breathe in. I had never in my life had a square inch of space that was solely mine. Growing up, my bedroom was basically where Kevin constantly stored all his disgusting hockey gear. My very first apartment was shared with roommates. My city condo was bought during a career stretch so chaotic I barely even lived inside the walls. This tiny cottage was the first actual piece of earth that demanded absolutely nothing from me. It just held me up. I remember sitting there thinking I should probably call someone up and tell them I was actually happy. I am so incredibly glad now that I didn't do that, because the phone started ringing entirely on its own just a few minutes later, and the voice on the other end didn't give a single damn about my happiness. It wanted the house. The screen lit up with one word: Mom. I picked it up, answering the exact same way I always did, soft, gentle, and completely ready to help. "Hey, Mom." No hello came back, just straight to the point. "We're moving in tomorrow," she says. "Your dad said it's totally fine." I actually let out a short laugh, fully believing I must have misheard her. "Moving in where?" I asked. "The beach house," she says it real slow, like I'm completely stupid. "We'll be down there by noon. Kevin's renting the U-Haul truck right now." I gripped the edge of my yellow kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. "Mom, this is my house. I bought it. I live here now." There was this heavy, cold pause on the line, and then her voice went completely flat and way too bright at the same time. It's that exact specific tone she uses when she has already made an executive decision and is just deeply annoyed that you are still wasting her time by talking. "Bonnie, we're family. Family takes care of family." I told her very carefully that we had never once discussed this, and that absolutely nobody had bothered to ask me if this was okay. And then she dropped the line that I am probably going to hear echoing in my sleep for the rest of my natural life. "If you don't like it, you can go find somewhere else." Go find somewhere else. Said straight to me by my own mother about the literal house I paid for with 9 brutal years of exhausting night shifts. I didn't scream. I didn't get loud. I want you to know that something inside of my soul went entirely still and incredibly clear, the exact same way it used to go right before a massive trauma patient came flying through the ER doors. She just kept right on rambling, telling me exactly which bedroom she wanted, saying Dad absolutely needed the one that got the morning light. She used the word "we" so many damn times I completely lost count. And not one single time did she drop a question. Not a "would that be okay with you?" Not even a "hey, could we?" Just straight up we, marching right into my life like the high tide. And buried right under all of that garbage sat the one specific line that didn't make any sense. "Your dad said it's fine." Dad, my incredibly quiet, completely conflict-allergic father, had officially signed off on hijacking my house. I told her flat out I'd call her right back. Then I sat down in the dark to think. Here is the absolute part I am the least proud of, and it's the part that probably sounds way too familiar to a lot of you listening right now. My immediate, gut-level instinct was to fix it, not fight it. Fix it. My thumb was literally hovering right over her contact name to call her back and just smooth the whole thing over. I was already low-key drafting the compliance script in my head. Maybe it's just for a little while. Maybe they can just have the back bedroom. Maybe I can find a way to make it work. Just keep the peace, Bonnie. Be the good daughter who handles things. 33 years of pure, unadulterated trauma reflex, all firing off at the exact same time, telling me the absolute fastest way to stop this agonizing pain was to just give them exactly what they wanted. I sat there with my ice-cold coffee, watched my own hands shake, and forced myself to completely stop. Triage first, I told myself. You do not treat a wound you haven't even looked at yet. That was the #1 golden rule that saved more lives in the ER than any drug I ever pushed into an IV line. Look before you act. Find out what is actually bleeding out. So I slammed the phone face down on the counter and started asking myself the real, hard questions. The way I'd analyze a patient whose vitals weren't making any sense. Why right now? Why is she so incredibly confident? Why the hell would she say, "Your dad said it's fine," when my father had literally never made a single bold decision in his entire existence? Why is there a moving truck already rented on a random night's notice when normal, sane people schedule those things a week in advance? None of this added up to some spontaneous, spur-of-the-moment idea. It smelled like a calculated plan, one that had been in motion for a hot minute completely behind my back. And the more I sat there dissecting it, the more one specific detail started bothering me way more than the rest. Kevin was renting the truck. My completely broke, freshly divorced brother, who hadn't held down an actual job in over a year, was suddenly the master of logistics for moving our parents 200 miles away. I picked the phone right back up. I called him. Kevin picked up on the 4th ring, and I could immediately hear the loud buzz of a TV in the background, which meant he was sitting right in our parents' basement where he'd been squatting ever since his divorce papers cleared. "Bonnie," he says, talking way too fast. "Look, before you start, I'm not starting a single thing, Kevin," I said, keeping it cool. "I just have one question. Mom says you're renting a moving truck." A heavy pause. "Yeah, for the move." "What move, Kevin?" Another pause, even longer this time. I could practically hear his brain cells working, trying to figure out exactly how much he should admit to me. "Don't make this super weird, Bonnie," he finally mutters. "Everyone already knows. This has been the play for weeks." Everyone already knows. I kept my voice as smooth as silk, the exact way I talk to a terrified patient in critical condition. "Knows what exactly, Kevin? That you're bringing Mom and Dad down here." "Yeah," he says, and this super defensive tone starts curling right under his words. "To the beach. Honestly, everybody around here is just completely relieved. It's been a lot to deal with lately." I asked him straight up who everybody was. He started listing them off like a basic grocery list. Aunt Sharon, 2 of our cousins, the Hendersons from their church. "So Mom told every single one of them?" I asked. "Mom didn't have to tell them anything," Kevin snaps. "You offered, remember?" I had not offered. I had not so much as dropped a single hint. But I didn't bother wasting my breath saying that to Kevin, because I could hear right through his voice that he either completely believed the lie, or he had consciously decided to believe it because it perfectly solved a massive problem for his own life. If Mom and Dad packed up and moved down to the coast, that basement was entirely his again. Free real estate. I told him I had to jump off the phone. He drops, "Bonnie, just be cool about this, all right?" And I hung up on him before I could even reply. I sat there in my pitch-black kitchen with the sound of the ocean shushing outside, and one cold, crystal-clear fact settled right into my bones. There was a whole narrative about my life circulating out there in the world, and I was the absolute last person on earth to find out about it. And let me tell you, I didn't have to wait very long for the absolute proof to roll in. The phone lit up while it was still sitting right in my hand. Aunt Sharon, my mother's younger sister, a woman who has literally never once called me without being explicitly deployed as a flying monkey. I swiped to answer. "There she is," Sharon chirps right into my ear. "We are all just so incredibly proud of you, honey." I asked her exactly what she was so proud of, keeping my tone completely light and airy. "Stepping up to the plate like this," she says warmly. "Taking your folks in." Lord knows it's a massive ask, but family takes care of family, and you have always just had the biggest, most beautiful heart. Family takes care of family. There it was again. The exact same script, the exact same phrase my mother used. Pass down the family line like a stale casserole dish. I asked Sharon very gently, "When exactly did I offer to take Mom and Dad in?" She let out a laugh like I had just cracked a joke. "Oh, honey, your mother told us months ago. Said you two had the whole thing completely worked out. Said you wanted them super close so you could personally look after them." Months ago. I had officially closed on this house exactly 4 weeks back, and I had only moved my body into it that very afternoon. The closing papers were literally still sitting in a manila folder right on my kitchen counter. I asked Sharon one final question, the exact way an ER nurse asks a patient to clarify a symptom without causing them to freak out. "Did Mom explicitly say I offered, or did she say she asked me?" There was a tiny, sharp silence on the line, the very first crack in the foundation. "Well," Sharon says real slow, "she said you offered. That's what she told us." I told her I really appreciated her calling me. I told her I loved her. Both of those things were actually true. Then I hung up, sat entirely still, and finally understood the exact beast I was dealing with. This was not some innocent little misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when two people remember a past conversation a little bit differently. This was a full-blown campaign. My mother had taken a scenario that had literally never happened, walked it door to door through the entire community, until it became an undeniable fact in everybody's mouth except mine. And I had exactly one single day to completely rip it apart. The wildest part about it was that I wasn't even surprised. The longer I sat there with it, the more I recognized the exact shape of the play. My mother had been running this exact same hustle my entire life. She had just never done it with stakes this incredibly high. She never asks for anything. She announces it to the world, and then she lets the sheer pressure of the crowd do all the heavy lifting for her. Think about it. When she wanted my college graduation party hosted at her house instead of the restaurant I picked, she didn't ask me. She just told all the relatives the party was at her place, mailed out the invitations, and by the time the news finally reached my ears, saying no would have meant letting down 40 people who had already bought gifts and cleared their schedules. When she wanted me to cosign a car loan for Kevin, she didn't ask. She told Kevin the whole thing was already handled, told him to go pick out the car, and then presented me with the legal paperwork while my brother sat right next to her looking all hopeful and pathetic. Saying no in that moment meant crushing him right to his face in real time. She masterclassed the art of building rooms entirely full of massive expectations, and then she would stand me right at the threshold of the door and dare me to walk away and look like the absolute villain of the story. It worked every single time because, for my whole life, I cared way more about not hurting other people's feelings than I did about not being completely used. That was my entire existence summarized in one single sentence. And I had never seen it laid out so completely naked until I was sitting all by myself in a cottage 200 miles away, finally standing completely outside of her crowd. And right then, that is exactly when the counterplan started to form in my mind, even though I didn't have all the chess pieces on the board just yet. If my mother's only real weapon was the crowd, the pure, paralyzing shame of saying no in front of an audience, then the crowd was also the exact one place where she could lose everything. She had built her fake story in front of a live audience. Fine. I would completely deconstruct it in front of that exact same audience. But first, I needed to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. So I called my dad. My father picked up on the very second ring, and he said my name like a man who had been dreading this exact phone call all day long. Bonnie, just that. Dad, I said. Mom is out here telling me that you told her it's fine for them to move straight into my house. I heard him take a long, heavy breath over the receiver. My dad is not a malicious man. He's just an incredibly tired one. A man who has spent 40 years letting my loud-mouthed mother make every single executive decision just so he wouldn't ever have to deal with the conflict. Your mother has a plan, honey, he says real quiet. Dad, that is not an answer to my question. We're in a really tight spot, Bonnie, he says, and his voice straight up cracked on the word tight. Things just didn't go the way I thought they would. And slowly, in that incredibly careful, deeply ashamed way men of his specific generation talk about money failing, the truth started rolling out in pieces. The business he had dumped his entire retirement fund into had completely gone under. There had been a bad business partner, a massive loan, and then suddenly there wasn't a business left at all. How bad is it, Dad? I asked. He didn't give me a straight number. What he said instead was honestly so much worse. Your mother handles all the house stuff, he muttered. I don't ask questions, I just sign wherever she points. And boom, there it was. The entire truth of my father encapsulated in one single line. He didn't tell her it's fine because he'd actually thought about my beach house. He said it's fine because he had completely stopped looking at what he was signing years ago. I felt this massive wave of hot anger start to rise up in my chest, but I just let it pass right through me, the exact same way I handle a brutal shift in the ER. Not ignored, just managed. Dad, I said, did Mom tell you that I offered up the house? A massive, agonizingly long pause. She said you two worked it out. We didn't, I told him flat out. He went dead silent. Then, almost too quiet for the phone to even pick up, he just whispered, oh, just oh. Like a small light bulb had finally clicked on in a room he had purposely kept pitch black for years. We hung up the phone, and I immediately stood up to go find that folder. Before I tell you exactly what was sitting inside that manila folder, I have to be completely transparent with you about the moment that came right before it. Because it's a moment a lot of you know intimately in your own bodies. Right after I hung up with my dad, the old fixer in me came roaring back to life with a vengeance. They are completely broke. My brain started screaming. Dad is absolutely humiliated. They have nowhere else to go. You have a whole entire second bedroom sitting empty, Bonnie. What kind of a horrible daughter lets her elderly parents twist in the wind over basic pride? I sat there at the counter and I genuinely, completely talked myself about 90% of the way towards saying yes. I opened up a text thread to my mother. I literally typed out the words, okay, we need to talk about some ground rules, but okay. My thumb was hovering directly over the send button, and I need you to understand something crucial right now. That text message was not an act of kindness. I have spent enough years surrounded by genuine kindness to know the difference. That text was just the old trauma wound trying to close itself up the fastest way possible. The exact kind of fast fix that scars completely wrong and aches every single winter for the rest of your life. Saying yes right then wouldn't have saved my parents. It would have just rewarded a massive lie, taught my mother that her social campaigns work perfectly every time, and handed my deadbeat brother Kevin a free beach house to comfortably lounge around in. It would have meant that the very first thing I had ever owned entirely on my own became, in less than 24 hours, just one more resource for the family to completely drain. The water shushed outside against the shore. I made myself read that typed text one more time. Then, I deleted it word by word until the text box was entirely empty. My hands had finally stopped shaking. And right then, before I could even celebrate the victory, the phone buzzed in my palm with a notification I hadn't seen in 2 whole months. The family group chat was lighting up like a Christmas tree. The name at the top read, "The Mayor's Family." 41 unread messages. I had muted that thing the second I went ghost. I unmuted it, and I started to read. But right before I started scrolling through the drama, I did the one thing 9 years of emergency room medicine had drilled into my skull. I gathered my chart. You do not walk into a high-stakes, critical situation with a toxic family without having your facts 100% in order. And I was absolutely not about to walk into this one empty-handed. I marched over to the kitchen drawer where I'd stashed the closing folder 4 weeks ago, the exact day I got the keys to the place. It was just a plain, boring manila folder, already a little soft at the corners. I opened it up right there on the yellow counter under the one good light in the kitchen. The deed was sitting right on top. I'd read it before, obviously, at the official closing while a super sweet real estate attorney named Ms. Albright walked me through every single line. But I read it again right now, incredibly slow. The exact same way you analyze a critical lab result that's going to dictate your entire next medical move. Grantee, one single name. Bonnie Marie Mayers, not and, not or. Not my mother, not my father, and sure as hell not Kevin. Not the Mayers family collective. One name. Mine, officially recorded with the county. I sat there staring at that single line of text for a long time, and something solid settled inside of me that no amount of weaponized family guilt could ever move. This cottage wasn't just a vibe. It wasn't a favor I owed them, and it wasn't some casual kindness I could be shamed out of keeping. It was a concrete legal fact with my name stamped on it, recorded in a courthouse, and absolutely no story told at a church potluck could change a single letter of it. I noticed Ms. Albright's business card paperclipped right to the inside of the folder. I pulled it out and set it aside where I could easily grab it. Then I propped the actual deed right against the kitchen backsplash so I could look at it, took a deep breath, and picked the phone back up. The mayor's family group chat was still glowing bright. 41 messages. I scrolled all the way up to the very top to where the match was struck and started reading exactly what my relatives had been saying about me while I had the entire world on mute. The very first text that actually mattered was from my mother, sent 3 weeks back. "Big news, everyone." It read, "Bonnie has finally agreed to do right by us. We'll be moving down to her beautiful place by the water this fall." Right below it was a massive wall of hearts, praise emojis, and congratulations from aunts and random cousins. "So incredibly happy for you guys. What an absolute blessing. Bonnie was always the responsible one." I kept scrolling down, my coffee completely forgotten. My mother had posted again a week later, and this time it was an actual photo of my cottage. My cottage. The silver wood porch, the crooked yellow kitchen cabinets completely visible through the front window, with her caption, "Our new little paradise by the water. Can't wait." Our asterisk new place. She had straight up lifted that photo from the real estate listing I had text messaged to exactly one person on this earth, my dad, in a rare moment of personal pride. There were messages discussing which local church she was planning to join down here. A text asking if there was going to be enough room for Kevin to move in too, just while he gets back on his feet, of course. A text from Aunt Sharon. "Bonnie is such an incredible girl to take this entire burden on." And then, right near the very bottom, came the one text that made the literal kitchen floor tilt right under my feet. My cousin Dana had posted a screenshot of a real estate listing. It was my parents' house, the brick ranch house I literally grew up in, the one where my childhood height is still marked in pencil right on the laundry room door frame. Stamped right across the front photo of the house in giant, bold red letters was one single word, "Under contract." The text below it from Dana read, "Congrats Aunt Linda and Uncle Ray on the official sale. Onward to the beach." I read that text 3 distinct times. They hadn't just casually decided to come crash at my house. They had legally sold their own home, signed a binding contract, and locked in an official closing date. They had completely cut the safety rope right behind them and were currently standing at the absolute edge of a cliff that just happened to be my front door, betting every single thing they owned on the earth that I would never have the nerve to let them fall. My mother hadn't come to ask me for a home. She had told the entire extended family I had already gifted them one, liquidated the only shelter they actually had left, and left me with exactly one socially acceptable answer. Yes. I put the phone down. My hands were completely, perfectly still now. I sat there with that reality for a long time, and I let myself feel the entire weight of it before I made a single move. This was not a story about a panicked, elderly couple who suddenly found themselves with nowhere to go. That was the fake narrative I had almost rescued an hour earlier, the lie that almost got my parents a key to my front door. This reality was something way colder and incredibly deliberate. My mother had looked right at my recovery, my hard-won peace, the one single thing I had ever built entirely for myself, and she didn't see a daughter healing. She saw prime real estate. She saw a perfect opportunity to completely solve her financial disaster at the direct expense of my entire future. And she saw it so clearly that she went ahead and sold her own house on the absolute strength of a yes I had never actually uttered. She didn't want to share a home with me. She told the world I'd already signed it away. And then she tried to make it true the only way she knew how, by making the alternative completely unthinkable. If I said no now, I wasn't just turning down a favor. In the narrative she had masterfully constructed, I was actively throwing my suddenly homeless parents out onto the street out of pure, unadulterated selfishness. That is what the crowd had been fed. That was the headline 41 unread messages had collectively agreed on. And for one final minute, that old, familiar fear had its hand wrapped tightly around my throat. Then, it completely let go and it didn't come back. Why? Because I finally understood the rules of the game I had been losing my entire life. My mother's only real weapon was the audience. The shame only worked because the audience completely believed her version of reality and had never once heard mine. She had spent 3 whole weeks loading that weapon. But a weapon built like that has one major design flaw. It points both ways. Every single person she had successfully lied to was a person who was capable of hearing the absolute truth. She had literally gathered my jury for me. All I had to do was call them into the exact same room, at the exact same hour, and finally stop being quiet. And I knew the exact hour that was going to be. Noon tomorrow, the moment the moving truck arrived. I want to pause right here because I know some of you listening are sitting with that exact same heavy knot in your stomach right now. The one that constantly whispers that if you dare to stand up and say no, you automatically become the bad guy. I felt that exact same thing in a house I bought with 9 years of my own sweat and blood. If anyone in your life has ever tried to tell you that your personal boundary was an insult to them, I need you to stay locked in with me through what happens next. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep rolling, because this is the exact moment the tide completely turned. Something shifted inside of me after I put that phone down. For 33 years, I had asked myself one question every single time my family yanked on my chain. Am I being selfish? That is a great question for a child. It is a total trap for an adult. That night, sitting right under my crooked yellow cabinets, I stopped asking it completely. I asked a totally different question instead, one I had never once permitted myself to say out loud. What do I want tomorrow to actually look like? And the answer came to me so fast and so incredibly calm that I almost laughed out loud. I wanted the absolute truth in the room, all of it. Before I built the rest of the plan, I made sure the ground underneath it was solid concrete, because an ER nurse does not hang a critical medical treatment on a wild guess. I thought back to the closing day, to Ms. Albright explaining legal details that I had only half listened to because they seemed like problems for a distant future. She had explicitly stated that the deed was titled in my name alone, sole ownership, recorded with the county. She said that meant the house was mine to do whatever I pleased with, full stop. I remembered asking her, half joking, whether my mother could ever pop up and make legal trouble about it, because some deeply buried part of me always braces for that hit. Ms. Albright had just smiled and dropped the line that I was currently holding onto like a life railing. A promise made at a dinner table is not a deed, Bonnie. In her exact words, a verbal agreement to give someone real property transfers absolutely nothing. The law demands it in writing, signed, and officially recorded. My mother could go ahead and tell every single relative across 3 states that I had offered her the house. She could fully believe the delusion herself. It carried the exact same legal weight as a basic wish. The only piece of paper that mattered was sitting right against my kitchen backsplash with one single name on it. I won't pretend that the law was the entire battle. The law doesn't physically stop a massive U-Haul truck from backing into your driveway. It doesn't stop your mother from sobbing hysterically in front of all your aunts and branding you heartless. But it meant that when the storm finally hit, I would be standing on solid stone instead of sinking sand. They could not force me to let them in. They could not legally stay if I told them to pack up and go. Everything past that point was just my mother's absolute favorite weapon: the crowd, the shame, the performance. And I had finally figured out exactly how to turn it right back around on her. I picked up Ms. Albright's business card. It was almost 9:00 p.m., but lawyers have email, and I had a very long night ahead of me. The plan was almost embarrassingly simple, which is exactly how I knew it was the right move. The complicated plans are always the ones built on pure revenge. This wasn't revenge. This was a clinical dressing change. You clean the wound out. You expose it to the fresh air. You let it heal honestly instead of letting it fester under a bandage of nice, convenient lies. My mother had built her entire position in front of an audience that had only ever listened to her side of the script. So I was simply going to ensure that the audience heard mine, in the exact same room, at the exact same time, with the legal documents sitting right on the table. No screaming, no wild accusations that she could spin into me being emotionally unstable. Just the facts laid out completely flat. While the exact people she had lied to sat there and watched her try to argue with a recorded deed. The absolute beauty of it was that I didn't even have to lure anyone in with a trick. I invited them with the truth, too. I'd call my aunt and my cousins up and tell them I was so incredibly glad they were excited about the move, and ask if they would like to come on down for a little casual housewarming get-together the exact morning my parents were scheduled to arrive. Of course they'd come. They fully believed they were showing up to a beautiful, happy ending. They were actually showing up to the truth, which is a totally different beast and honestly a much better one. I scribbled a short list on the back of an old envelope the exact way I used to map out a critical shift plan. 1. Email Ms. Albright tonight. 2. Confirm the locks. 3. Invite Sharon and the cousins for tomorrow morning. 4. Set out fresh coffee like a person who has absolutely nothing to hide, because I didn't. I looked down at the list. 4 lines, 1 email, and a single phone call left to make. The rest of the old compliance arsenal was officially dead and gone. And remember those 3 specific phone calls I mentioned way back at the start? The ones I made before that truck ever pulled in. 2 of them were already completely behind me. My brother, then my father, on the night the whole thing kicked off. The 3rd call was the one that was going to completely decide the morning, and I was going to make it the exact second the sun came up. I fired off the email to Ms. Albright a little bit after 9:00 p.m. I kept it completely short, sweet, and factual, the exact way I write a medical handoff note. I told her my parents intended to physically move into the property the very next day, that they firmly believed they had a legal right to do so, and that I wanted to understand exactly where I stood and whether I needed to have anything in writing. I honestly didn't expect a reply until the morning. She hit me back in 40 minutes flat, which told me everything I needed to know. She had seen this exact brand of family toxic dynamic before. Her reply was incredibly calm and crystal clear, and I read it twice. She confirmed exactly what I had remembered from closing day. The property belonged to me alone. Nobody else on earth had any legal interest in it whatsoever. A verbal claim, no matter who made it or how many people they had run their mouth to, conveyed absolutely zero ownership. She wrote that I was under no legal obligation to allow anyone to move into my home, and that anyone who entered the property and refused to leave would be there entirely without my permission, which is a specific scenario the law has very plain, unfun words for. Then she offered me something I hadn't even thought to ask for, but was incredibly grateful to secure. She said if it would help de-escalate things, she could quickly draft the legal essentials into a short, formal letter on her law firm's letterhead confirming my sole, undisputed ownership that I could keep on hand. Sometimes, she wrote, people love to argue with a daughter, but they will not argue with a lawyer. I typed back, Yes, please, and thank you. By 10:30 p.m., there was a beautiful one-page PDF sitting right in my inbox. My name, the official parcel number, the recording date, and 2 incredibly dry, bulletproof sentences confirming that the home belonged exclusively to me and that no other party held a single claim. I printed it out on the little desktop printer in my new spare room. I slid that paper right into the manila folder, tucked perfectly behind the deed. 2 pages now. One from a government courthouse, one from a high-profile attorney. Quiet pages, the loudest things in the entire house. The second line on my envelope read, "Confirm the locks." And I honestly almost laughed out loud when I went to cross it off, because there was literally nothing left for me to do. I had already taken care of it weeks ago without even knowing I was actively protecting my future self. When you buy a new house, any decent person at the closing table will tell you to immediately change out the locks, because you never truly know how many random keys are floating around out there from the previous owner's life. Ms. Albright had told me to do exactly that 4 weeks earlier, and I had hired a guy to do it the exact same afternoon I got the keys, long before I ever carried a single moving box inside. A locksmith had come straight out and completely rekeyed the front door, the back door, and the side door right off the kitchen. He handed me 3 shiny, brand new keys on a ring, and those were the only keys to my house that existed anywhere in the entire universe. My mother didn't have one. My father didn't have one. And Kevin, who I would later find out had been casually telling people he'd be claim-staking the spare bedroom, sure as hell didn't have one. I want to be 100% clear about something right now, because I think it really matters. I wasn't maliciously locking my family out. You cannot lock someone out of a door you never once handed them a key to in the first place. I had simply, from the very second the house became mine, treated it like it was mine. Because it was. The new locks weren't some weapon I built specifically for this war. They were just the ordinary, good sense of an adult woman who had finally bought something with her own money and fully intended to keep it. I stood right at my front door that night, turned the deadbolt, felt it slide home incredibly solid and clean into the frame, and I thought about how many times in my life I had left the door completely unlocked for people who just walked right through it and started rearranging my entire life. Not this one. Not anymore. I flipped off the kitchen light. I had one final phone call left to make in the morning, and it was the absolute main event. I called Aunt Sharon at 8:00 a.m. the next morning, early enough to catch her before her day got rolling, but late enough to not sound panicked. I made sure my voice sounded completely warm, and honestly, I didn't even have to fake it. Because I do genuinely love her, and because the absolute warmest thing I could possibly do for her was to stop letting my mother use her as a puppet. "Sharon," I said, "I am so glad everyone is so excited about the move." "Oh, honey, we are," she chirps right back. "We surely are. I was just thinking," I said. "Mom and Dad are going to be rolling in around noon. Why don't you, Dana, and Bate come on down too? Make it a little casual housewarming. I would absolutely love to have the family see the new place." There was this little pause on the line, a super happy one. "Oh, honey, we would absolutely love that. Are you completely sure?" "On a crazy moving day?" "I am 100% sure," I told her. "It is incredibly important to me that everyone is there." And that last sentence was the absolute truest thing I said all morning, though Sharon heard it one way and I meant it a totally different way. She immediately started planning out what food to bring down, a fresh coffee cake, some of her good folding chairs in the back of the van. I just let her roll with it. I told her noon, and told her to come a little bit early if she could manage it. She said she'd round up the cousins right now. When I hung up the phone, I sat there for a second just marveling at the sheer strangeness of the situation. I had just successfully invited my mother's own hand-picked witnesses to watch her whole entire narrative completely self-destruct, and they had thanked me for the invitation and were literally bringing a coffee cake. I wasn't feeling proud, exactly. It was more like that specific physical feeling you get after you finally set a badly broken bone back into its proper alignment. A hard, clean, deep ache, and right underneath it, total relief. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I set out a bunch of mugs, way more than I actually needed. I took the manila folder and placed it right in the kitchen drawer, closed, but absolutely not hidden. Then I walked out, sat down in that wicker chair on my silver porch, and I just waited for my family to arrive. A lot of people, when I tell them this story later on, always ask me the exact same thing. "Bonnie, Why didn't you just call your mother back right then and scream at her? Why didn't you just tell her off and let her have it? Here is the number one thing I learned working in high-stakes trauma for 9 years. The absolute loudest person in the room is almost never the person who is actually in control of the situation. I didn't need volume. I needed witnesses. If you have ever figured out the hard way that the absolute calmest person in the room is usually the one holding all the real power, then you already completely understand the morning that was about to go down. Share this video with someone who needs that exact reminder today. Then stay right here with me, because the truck is about to pull directly into the drive. I should tell you that I actually slept that night. I mean really slept, deep, heavy, and completely dreamless in the back bedroom, with the window cracked just enough so I could hear the ocean moving outside. The morning of the absolute hardest conversation of my entire life, I woke up completely rested. That is exactly how I knew the fight was already completely over somewhere where it actually counted. The rest of it was just waiting around for everyone else to finally find out. Sharon and the cousins rolled up at 11:40 am, 20 minutes before noon, exactly according to plan. Sharon swept right up the porch steps carrying a full-covered coffee cake and her good folding chairs, and Dana and Bate came right behind her holding a thermos and a bag of clementines, treating the whole thing like the happy family reunion they fully thought it was. "Oh, Bonnie," Sharon breathed, looking out at the ocean view. "This is a literal little piece of heaven." It really was. I had thought the exact same thing myself just the evening before everything blew up. I poured them all hot coffee in my mismatched kitchen mugs and let them wander through the small rooms. They were cooing over the crooked yellow cabinets, the silver porch wood, and the old cracked window with the sea breeze blowing right through it. Bate asked me which bedroom was going to be mine and which one was going to be Mom's, and I just smiled, refilled her cup, and told her the coffee was fresh. I didn't lie to them once. I want that completely on the record. I never one time uttered a single word of the lies my mother had put in my mouth. I just let them stand inside my house, in the warm sunlight, full of joy and clementines. And I let them be exactly as glad to be there as they wanted to be. Why? Because in about 15 minutes, every single one of them was going to need to vividly remember that I had been incredibly kind, that I had been completely calm, and that I had welcomed them in with open arms. That stark contrast was going to matter immensely. Sharon was right in the middle of a sentence about her garden when we all suddenly heard it. The deep, heavy roar of a massive engine downshifting, followed by the long, loud crunch of heavy tires turning off the sandy lane and onto my gravel driveway. Through the front window, a giant white moving truck nosed right into view, way too big for the little driveway, and rolling right behind it was my father's old sedan. My family looked at me, absolutely delighted. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. "Right on time," I said. I want to describe exactly how they stepped out of that truck, because it tells you absolutely everything you need to know about what my mother truly thought was happening. The passenger side door flew open first, and my mother stepped down onto the gravel like a queen arriving at a massive property she already legally owned. She had dressed up for the occasion, pressed slacks, her good gold earrings, her hair freshly set. She surveyed the cottage, the ocean line, and the porch with this tiny, self-satisfied little nod, the exact nod of a person confirming that a luxury asset she'd been promised had officially been delivered right to her. My father climbed out of the sedan real slow, and he would not look at the house. Not even once. He stared at his shoes, at the gravel, up at the sky, anywhere on earth except the front door. And I understood right then that my phone call the night before had finally turned a bright light on in that dark room of his, and he could no longer unsee the horror of what was inside of it. And then Kevin dropped down out of the truck's cab, did a big stretch, and hauled open the heavy back rolling door to reveal the truck stacked completely floor to ceiling with their entire lives. Boxes labeled in my mother's distinct handwriting. Kitchen, linens, Ray, office. A recliner, a headboard. The entire contents of a liquidated house, every single piece of it riding on the absolute bet that Bonnie would fold under pressure. My mother started marching up the walkway with her arms already opening up wide, and her eyes suddenly locked onto the porch. And that is the exact split second her entire stride changed. Why? Because the porch was not empty. Her sister was standing right on it holding a coffee cake. Her nieces were standing right behind her with bags of clementines and completely confused looks on their faces. And there I was, standing dead in the doorway of my own house, calm as a Sunday morning, casually holding a coffee mug. For just 1 second, a single half step, my mother completely hesitated. I watched her brain actively recalculate the entire scene. I watched her decide right then and there that this random audience was actually a bonus, a perfect crowd to perform her grand arrival for. She slapped her fake smile back onto her face and marched right up the steps. "Well," she announced to the whole porch, "we finally made it." What happened next was a performance my mother handed right to me on a silver platter. She walked straight into my living room like a luxury tour guide and started putting on a show. "Oh, it's definitely smaller than it looked in the pictures," she says, running a judgmental finger along my clean windowsill. "But we'll find a way to make it work. Ray, the morning light is in the back room. That's going to be our bedroom." She turned around to Sharon and beamed. "We have been planning this whole move out for months, haven't we, Bonnie? It just makes complete sense. The whole family all together." She turned to Dana and casually dropped that Kevin could just take the second bedroom until he gets himself sorted out. She told Bate she was already thinking about completely repainting my yellow cabinets, something way more neutral. She stood dead in the center of the house I bought with 9 years of exhausting night shifts, and she casually gave away its rooms one by one to an audience she fully trusted to be completely charmed by her. And the entire time, I just stood there and watched her. I let her run her mouth. Why? Because every single word flying out of her face was a brick I wouldn't have to lay myself later on. Sharon's smile had started to go completely stiff. She kept glancing over at me, waiting for me to join in on the conversation, to laugh and agree the exact way I always used to do. And I didn't. I just stood right by the kitchen drawer with my coffee and let the silence build up in the room. My mother didn't even notice the silence. She had never in her life had to notice my silence before, because I had always stepped in and filled it up for her. She just kept right on talking, planning out Thanksgiving in my tiny dining space, telling Bate which local church group she was going to join. And the more she rambled, the more the massive gap started to show between her delusional story and the completely calm, unmoved woman standing in the doorway of a house that clearly already belonged to someone else. Finally, she clapped her hands together real bright and final. "All right," she said. "Kevin, go ahead and start with the kitchen boxes. Bonnie." "Honey, where exactly do you want our heavy things?" The entire room turned their heads to look straight at me. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. "Before we move a single box into this house," I said, "I want to make absolutely sure that everyone sitting in this room understands the exact same thing, because I think there has been some serious confusion out there." My voice was completely easy, totally conversational, the exact voice I used to tell a crashing family that their loved one had finally stabilized. My mother's fake smile tightened instantly. "Bonnie, this is absolutely not the time or the place for this." "Mom," I said very gently, "tell everyone here again the exact way you told them on the phone. What exactly did I agree to?" She blinked. "We discussed it. You wanted us close by." "When?" I asked. "What exact date did we discuss it?" "Months ago," she says, but her eyes immediately flicked over to Sharon, checking the room's temperature. "I legally closed on this house exactly 4 weeks ago," I said. "I moved my body into it yesterday. What exact month did I offer my home to you?" The heavy pause that followed that question was the first real silence my mother had ever lost in her entire life. Sharon shifted uncomfortably on her feet. Dana frowned, looked straight down at her phone screen, and started doing the exact same math I had done the night before. "You text messaged me the listing," my mother said, pivoting incredibly fast. "You wanted to show it to me." "I sent that listing to Dad," I told her. "One single person, the exact night I got the keys because I was proud of what I achieved." I turned my body toward my aunt, keeping my voice completely warm because none of this garbage was her fault. "Sharon, when Mom told you that I had offered up my house, did I ever, even one single time, say those words to you myself?" Sharon's mouth literally opened and closed like a fish. "Well," she said real slow, "no, your mother told us." "I know exactly what my mother told you," I said, still keeping it gentle. "I just need everyone in this room to be crystal clear on the fact that I never said it." The entire room had gone completely, dead silent. The good folding chairs, the coffee cake, the clementines, all totally forgotten. My mother's face had started to twist, the whole grand performance completely cracking at the edges. And that is the exact moment I reached down and slid open the kitchen drawer. I pulled out the plain manila folder, walked over, and set it completely flat on the dining table right where everybody could see it. I opened it wide. 2 pages. I didn't raise my voice a single octave. "This is the legal deed to this house," I said, turning the paper around so Sharon and the cousins could read the text. "There is exactly one name printed on it. Mine, not Mom's, not Dad's, and definitely not the family collective. Mine, officially recorded at the courthouse." I laid the second printed page right beside it. "And this is a formal letter from the attorney who personally handled the sale. It says the exact same thing. House belongs exclusively to me, and absolutely nobody else on this earth has a single legal claim to it. A promise made at a random dinner table is not a physical deed, Mom. You can tell people I offered it up until you're blue in the face. You can fully believe the lie yourself. It does not move a single brick of this house out of my name." One entire heartbeat. Nobody in the room even breathed. And then my mother completely exploded. "After every single thing we ever did for you." She screams, her voice climbing through the roof and cracking completely. "You would put your own parents out on the street right in front of the family? I raised you. I gave up absolutely everything for you, and you stand there holding a stupid piece of paper." She was screaming now, loud enough that Bate literally flinched. Her face was turning bright red, her tears smudging her freshly set hair. "We sold our house, Bonnie. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. Is that what you want? To humiliate us in public? To throw your own parents away like straight-up garbage?" She wanted me to match her crazy energy. She desperately needed me to get loud, to scream back, to become the unstable, ungrateful, crazy daughter her narrative required me to be. I didn't give it to her. I stood right there with my hands folded neatly together and just let her entire storm crash and burn against my silence. And the quieter I stayed, the louder and completely smaller she looked, until the only person acting a fool in that room was her. And the exact audience she had meticulously gathered to shame me into submission was sitting there watching her self-destruct instead. "You didn't sell your house because of me," I said, the exact second she finally paused to catch her breath. "You put that house under contract before you ever bothered to ask me. There is a massive difference between those two things. And every single person sitting in this room can see it clearly right now." My mother stared at me, her chest heaving up and down, and she finally asked the one question she had never once in her life had to ask me directly. "So what the hell are we supposed to do now?" The entire room waited in dead silence, and I handed her back the only answer that fit the chart. The exact same words she had dropped on me over the phone the night before, delivered in the exact same even, level tone she had used on me, returned to her sender exactly the way they had left her mouth. "If you don't like it," I said, "you can go find somewhere else." Silence that followed that line was absolute. Sharon slowly set her coffee mug down on the table like it had suddenly turned into lead. Kevin, who had been hovering right in the living room doorway holding a box marked kitchen in his arms, slowly bent his knees, set the box down on the floor, and didn't bother to pick another one up. My father had quietly sat himself down in one of Sharon's good folding chairs without a single soul noticing, his hands just hanging limply between his knees. My mother looked all around the room, desperately searching for her allies, the crowd she had spent 3 weeks building up, the chorus that always pushed me into compliance for her, and one by one, absolutely nobody would meet her eyes. Dana was glued to her phone, looking at the listing screenshot and verifying the dates. Bate was staring straight down at the floorboards. Sharon was looking at her sister with an expression I had never seen her direct at my mother in my entire life. Not anger, but something way worse than anger. Pure doubt. The audience had finally heard the other side of the script, in the exact same room, at the exact same hour. And the weapon my mother had spent weeks loading had just gone off straight in her own hands. I would be completely lying to you if I told you that I felt nothing but pure victory in that moment, because that is not how it actually went down. And you have trusted me this far, so I am absolutely not about to start lying to you now. The exact second my mother realized the entire room had turned against her, all the fury completely drained right out of her body. And what was left sitting underneath, the performance, was the one thing she had been hiding behind the loud facade the entire time: plain old human fear. She was 63 years old. The house she had raised her children in was officially sold out from under them. The retirement money my father swore he had handled was completely gone. And she had just been seen completely naked by every single relative whose respect she had spent a lifetime micromanaging. For one split second, she didn't look like my massive adversary anymore. She looked like a terrified, broken woman who had made a horrific bet and lost everything right in front of the world. And some deeply buried part of me, the part that spent 9 years holding the hands of terrified, dying people in the ER, low-key ached for her. I want to be totally honest with you that the ache was real. I also want to be totally honest with you that it did not change my mind for a single second. And I think that is the number one hardest lesson it took me 33 years to finally learn. You can feel deep empathy for someone and still absolutely refuse to hand them over your house. You can be deeply sorry that someone is terrified and still refuse to let their fear become your personal responsibility. I felt incredibly sorry for my mother that morning. I just finally stopped feeling responsible for her life. Those are two completely different things. It just took me my whole entire life to figure out how to tell them apart. They didn't move in. There was absolutely nothing left to argue about once the deed was sitting on the table and the room had gone completely quiet. Kevin carried that single kitchen box right back out to the U-Haul. And the rest of their packed-up lives rode right back up the coast that afternoon, eventually getting unloaded into a random storage unit my mother could afford even less than her own pride. Sharon stayed behind after the truck drove away. She sat with me out on that silver porch and apologized to me, really, truly apologized, her hands visibly shaking around her coffee cup. "She told us you offered, Bonnie," Sharon kept repeating. "I never even thought to ask you directly. I should have asked you." I told her it wasn't her fault, and I genuinely meant it. That is exactly how the weapon worked. It only required people who loved my mother enough to believe her script without ever double-checking the facts. My parents ended up renting a modest 2-bedroom apartment near their old neighborhood within the month, the exact kind of practical place they could have easily chosen from the very start if they had just been honest. The kind of place that didn't require stealing anyone's house except their own choices. Kevin, realizing the basement was no longer a guaranteed squatting spot, actually went out and found a job. Not a fantastic one, but a job. And the family group chat, the one that had been flooded with 41 cheerful messages about my forced generosity, went completely silent for a while. And then, it slowly came back to life as something way more honest. A space where, for the first time in my existence, people actually asked me how I was doing instead of blindly telling me what I had already agreed to handle. I didn't cut my parents off completely. People always expect that to be the big cinematic ending, the clean break, the door slamming shut forever. It wasn't like that. A week after the showdown, I emailed my mother a curated list of senior apartments in their county, 3 options, complete with phone numbers, places that perfectly fit their actual budget. That was all. Not money, and definitely not my front door key, just a list and a phone number. The exact help I was willing to give freely on my own terms, instead of the sacrifice that gets forcefully snatched from you and branded as your family duty. She never once thanked me for it, but my father called me up a few weeks later just to talk. And right at the very end of the call, he dropped, quiet as ever, "I'm glad you kept your house, Bonnie." That was the absolute closest he could ever come to saying the rest of the truth, and I took it for what it was. I see them every now and then now, on my terms, at my personal pace, with the truth finally sitting right in the room with us instead of a massive lie told behind my back. It is definitely not the dream family I wanted as a little girl, but it is an honest one. And it is the very first family I have ever been able to truly rest inside of. If there is one single thing I learned in that tiny cottage by the water, it is this. A home is absolutely not something you are automatically owed just because you happen to share the same last name. It is something you build. And the people who truly, genuinely love you will always ask to be let inside. They don't just announce to the world that they're already inside the house. That's my story. One phone call, one recorded deed, and one beautiful, quiet morning right by the water. If there is someone currently in your life who keeps constantly mistaking your kindness for an open door, I need you to take this video as your official sign. Change out the locks today or make absolutely sure, the exact way I did, that you never hand over the key. If this message reached your soul today, share it with someone who desperately needs to hear it. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next one.